The bet was supposed to last one weekend. Nobody expected it to change everything. It started the way most stupid ideas do, with too much whiskey, a Friday night with nothing to lose, and a man named Brendan Foley who had spent the better part of his adult life winning every argument he ever entered. Brendan was 38 years old, the kind of man who made other people nervous in elevators. Not because he was loud, he wasn't. He was quiet in the way that expensive things are quiet. His suits were charcoal gray and fitted without being flashy. His watch was the sort you'd only recognize if you already knew what to look for. He'd built Foley Capital Group from a 2-room office in downtown Toronto into one of the most aggressive real estate investment firms in the country, and he'd done it in 11 years with nothing but a business degree, a near pathological inability to sleep, and a hunger he never quite knew what to do with. His best friend, a man named Will, liked to say that Brendan had forgotten how to be a person somewhere around the time he turned 30. Will said it laughing, the way you say things that are mostly true but too uncomfortable to say any other way. That Friday night they were at Will's place in the Annex. 4 men, 1 bottle of Glenlivet that was nearly finished, and a conversation that had somehow drifted from the Leafs season to second marriages, to whether Brendan, who had been single for going on 4 years, was actually incapable of connecting with a woman who didn't already know his net worth. "You don't even see regular people anymore," Will said. "You live in a bubble. I live in a condo," Brendan said. "It's not a bubble. You fly private. You eat at places with wait lists. You haven't stood in an actual line for anything in years." Brendan swirled what was left in his glass. "Standing in line is not a personality trait. It's not about the line." Will leaned forward. "It's about whether you can walk into a normal place and actually talk to someone without your reputation doing all the work, without the Foley name, without any of it." The bet that followed was not sophisticated. Will challenged Brendan to spend one full weekend, Friday evening to Sunday night, presenting himself as an ordinary person. No business cards, no expensive watches, no mention of what he did or what he owned. He would go somewhere in the city where nobody knew him, eat where regular people ate, talk to whoever he encountered. If he made a genuine connection with a woman, not a date, not a transaction, something real, then Will would admit he was wrong. If he couldn't manage it, Brendan would match the charitable donation Will had been asking him to make to the Regent Park Food Bank for the past 2 years. "That's not a real bet," Brendan said. "The donation isn't a punishment." "No," Will agreed, "but losing will be." Brendan agreed mostly because he was certain he would win. He was not, he told himself, a man who needed his money to fill a room. He was charming when he chose to be. He was articulate. He could talk to anyone. He went home that night, changed out of his suit, put the Rolex in his dresser drawer, and pulled on a gray Henley and jeans that he'd owned for years but rarely wore. He looked in the mirror for a long moment. He looked like himself, just quieter. That would do. He drove himself. Not the Escalade, but the old Civic he'd kept for no reason he could properly explain, to a neighborhood in Scarborough where he knew no one, where his face had never been in any newspaper or on any gala program. He parked on a side street and walked until he found a coffee shop with steamed-up windows and a handwritten chalkboard out front advertising a breakfast special for $7.99. Inside, it smelled like butter and strong coffee. The tables were mismatched, the chairs slightly wobbly, and the music was low and indistinct. It was exactly the kind of place he had not been in a very long time. He took a seat near the window and picked up the laminated menu. That was when he saw her. She came through the kitchen door carrying 2 plates stacked on one forearm and a third, balanced in her other hand, navigating between tables with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this since before it became muscle memory. She set the plates down without spilling a drop, said something to the table that made an elderly man laugh, and was already moving on before the laughter finished. "Her name tag," said Kate. She had dark hair pulled back in a knot that was coming slightly loose on one side, and there was a small ink stain on her wrist that she hadn't bothered to notice yet. She was maybe 30, possibly a year or 2 younger. When she finally turned toward his table, her eyes were the kind of dark brown that didn't give much away. "What can I get you?" she said, direct, not unfriendly. "Coffee to start," Brendan said. "And a minute with the menu. Take your time." She was already turning. "You've been working here long?" He hadn't planned to say it. It came out slightly stilted, like a man auditioning for a role he hadn't rehearsed. She glanced back at him. 3 years, a pause. "You new to the neighborhood?" "Just passing through," he said. "Well, the French toast is better than it sounds," she said, and moved on. He watched her work for the better part of an hour. She was efficient without being cold. She remembered how the older woman at table 4 took her tea. She noticed when a young mother's toddler knocked a fork off the table and had a new one in front of the child before the mother had finished apologizing. She moved like someone who was tired but had decided a long time ago that she wasn't going to let anyone see it. Brendan had interviewed hundreds of people over the years. He was, by necessity, a student of how people presented themselves under pressure. Kate did not perform. She simply worked. And there was something in that, something he couldn't immediately name, that made him want to stay longer than he had any reasonable excuse to. He ordered the French toast. He came back the next morning. On the second morning, she recognized him. "Back again," she said, not quite a question. "The French toast," he said. She gave him a look that said she was not entirely persuaded by this explanation, but she wrote it down anyway. He learned things about her in fragments, the way you learn things about someone when you're both pretending that you're only making small talk. She'd grown up in this neighborhood. She'd taken 2 years of environmental science at Ryerson before life made that particular plan impractical in ways she didn't elaborate on. She was direct to the point of occasional bluntness. She did not ask what he did for a living, which was, in his experience, virtually unprecedented. What he did not learn that day, what he only found out later in a way that made everything more complicated, was this. Kate Marlow was raising her 7-year-old daughter, Rosalie, on her own. The girl's father had left when Rosalie was 18 months old, not dramatically, not angrily, just quietly and thoroughly, in the way that some men disappear from things that become inconvenient. Kate had not spoken his name to Rosalie in any context that carried weight. She had simply become both things at once. The one who worked the early shift and the one who picked up from school. The one who sat through the fever nights, and the one who made sure there was always something in the fridge. She had done this without complaint and without the expectation of recognition, because that was the only way she knew how to love. Brendan did not know any of this on that second morning. He knew only that when Kate laughed at something, he said, really laughed, not a polite professional sound, but an actual involuntary laugh that she seemed mildly annoyed at herself for. He felt something shift in his chest in a way that was unfamiliar and not entirely comfortable. He drove back to his condo that evening and sat at his kitchen counter for a long time, looking at nothing in particular. He told Will about her on Sunday night. He said she was interesting. He said he'd gone back. He said, somewhat to his own surprise, that it hadn't felt like a bet. Will said very carefully, "Brendan, what did you tell her about yourself?" Brendan was quiet for a moment. "Not much. Did you tell her anything true?" "I told her my name." Will closed his eyes briefly. "And the rest, I said I worked in finance, which is true." "Brendan, she didn't ask Will. She will." He went back the following Saturday, and the one after that. He told himself it was because the neighborhood was interesting, because he was exploring a part of the city he'd overlooked, because the coffee was genuinely decent. He told himself these things with the conviction of a man who is very good at making arguments and knows, somewhere beneath the argument, that he's losing. Kate noticed he came back. She didn't say much about it, but she started giving him slightly better tables. She learned he took his coffee black, that he had a habit of turning his phone face down when he sat down, that he read actual physical newspapers when he could find them. She was not impressed by him. This was not something Brendan was accustomed to. Not in a hostile way. She simply treated him the way she treated everyone who sat in her section, with competence and a kind of low-key warmth that was offered equally, and not as a performance. He was not special to her, not yet. The afternoon that changed things happened on a gray October Saturday. Brendan arrived at the coffee shop to find it quieter than usual, and Kate at a corner table, on what was clearly a break, sharing a sandwich with a small girl who had her mother's dark eyes and an extremely serious expression. Rosalie. He didn't know her name yet. Kate looked up when she saw him, and something crossed her face that was impossible to read. Not embarrassment, not quite. More like the look of someone who has just had 2 compartments of their life unexpectedly overlap. "Hey," she said. "We close at 4 today. My daughter's off school." "I can come back another time," Brendan said immediately. "No, sit down," the girl said. She said it with the complete authority of a 7-year-old who has been accustomed to being the most interesting person in any room. "We have extra sandwich." Brendan looked at Kate. Kate shrugged in a way that meant I am not responsible for whatever she says. He sat down. The girl's name, it turned out, was Rosalie, and she had opinions about approximately everything. She was currently working through a phase of deep interest in birds, specifically Canadian birds, specifically the common loon, which she informed Brendan was not actually common at all. It was just called that. He found this, to his genuine surprise, quite interesting. He knew very little about birds. He told her so. She seemed to find his ignorance useful rather than embarrassing, and proceeded to spend 25 minutes educating him with the focused energy of someone who has found an untapped audience. Kate watched this with an expression Brendan couldn't entirely read. Something careful, something that was trying not to become something else. When Rosalie finally excused herself to use the bathroom, Kate looked at Brendan across the table and said, quietly, "She doesn't warm up to people like that." Brendan said nothing. "She doesn't really have a—" Kate stopped, started again. "It's just her and me, mostly. She doesn't get a lot of practice with." Another stop. "She's wonderful," Brendan said, and meant it. Kate looked at him for a moment, then looked away. He asked her for coffee, outside the shop, as two people, not as customer and server, 3 weeks later. She said yes after a pause that was long enough to mean she had considered saying no. They went to a place in Leslieville that was quiet and slightly too warm and very good. They talked for 2.5 hours. He told her real things, about growing up in Sudbury, about his mother who had worked double shifts at a hotel for 15 years, about the first deal he'd ever done, which had been terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. He did not tell her what the company was worth now. He told himself this was because it hadn't come up. She told him about Ryerson, about the 2 years that had been cut short when her mother got sick and she'd needed to come back. About the coffee shop which she'd started as a temporary thing 5 years ago, and which had slowly, without her entirely noticing, become something she was proud of. About Rosalie, who had started reading at 4 and had recently become concerned about the migration patterns of songbirds and whether climate change was disrupting them. "She sounds like she's going to be someone," Brendan said. "She already is," Kate said, without any particular emphasis. It was just true. He drove her home. She thanked him at the door. She did not invite him in. He did not expect it. He drove home thinking about the way she'd said she already is. That flat, certain, quiet love. And he thought about it for the rest of the week. It was Will who, without meaning to, set the fire. 4 weeks later, Will came into the coffee shop. Brendan had not told him where it was. Will had found it the way people find things when they're looking. Through a mutual acquaintance. Through the specific effort of someone who was paying attention to something Brendan had said. Will had a good heart and imperfect judgment, and he came through the door of the coffee shop on a Wednesday morning while Brendan was there and Kate was working, and he said, loudly enough and with enough obvious delight, "There it is, the famous coffee shop." Brendan said this place had the best French toast in the East End. Kate, behind the counter, looked up. She looked at Will, then at Brendan. Something in her expression shifted in a way that was very quiet and very complete. Will seemed to realize his error approximately 2 seconds too late. He said, "I'll just," and gestured vaguely at a table. Brendan looked at Kate. "Brendan," she said. Just his name, with a particular flatness. "Kate, what do you do?" she said. "For work." "Exactly," he told her. The silence that followed was not dramatic. Kate was not the kind of person who made dramatic silences. She simply went very still for a moment, in the way of someone whose understanding of a situation has just rearranged itself. And then she said, "I'll get your friend a menu," and turned and walked back toward the kitchen. She did not come to his table again that morning. A teenager named Marcus took over his section. Brendan sat with his coffee until it was cold, and then he left. He sent a text that evening. "I should have told you earlier. I'm sorry." She read it. She did not reply. He sent another one the next morning. "The bet was something stupid," my friend said, on a Friday night. "It was over by the second time I came back. I should have told you. I know that doesn't fix it." Still nothing. He did not go back to the coffee shop that week. What he didn't know, what was happening in a part of the story he couldn't see, from where he was standing, was that the same week, in a part of the city Brendan had never spent time in, a letter arrived at a community center in the Scarborough neighborhood where Kate had grown up. The letter was from Foley Capital Group. It was a notice of intent to purchase a parcel of land that included the block on which the community center stood. The community center had a before-school program. 23 children attended it every weekday, most of them from single-parent households, most of them from families that had no other options for morning childcare. Rosalie had attended it for 3 years. Kate heard about the letter from her friend Sandra, who ran the front desk. Sandra forwarded the PDF at 11:15 on a Thursday night with nothing but 3 question marks in the subject line. Kate read the letter twice. She sat at her kitchen table for a long time. Then she looked at the sender's name at the top of the letterhead. Foley Capital Group. Brendan J. Foley, President and CEO. She put her phone face down on the table. She did not sleep much that night. When she finally agreed to meet him, not at the coffee shop, not anywhere comfortable, but at a bench in a park near the community center, it was 3 weeks after Will had walked through the door. Brendan arrived first. He sat with his hands in his jacket pockets and watched a pair of mallards work their way across the pond. He was not, he reflected, accustomed to waiting. He was not, he reflected, accustomed to any of this. Kate came at 11:10, in her jacket and her work boots with her hair loose. She did not sit down right away. "Tell me about the community center," she said. He looked up. He had not expected this to be the opening, though perhaps he should have. "The Glenridge property," he said. "The Glenridge property," she repeated carefully, "is in the neighborhood where I grew up, where I still live. It's where Rosalie goes for before-school care. Where I went when I was a kid, because my mother worked mornings and there was nowhere else." Brendan was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know it was that building. Would it have mattered?" It was not a rhetorical question. She was genuinely asking. He understood that, and he didn't look away. "I don't know," he said. "I want to tell you yes. I'm not certain that's true." She sat down then, sideways from him, looking at the water. "The bet," she said. "How much was the bet?" "A charitable donation to a food bank." She turned to look at him. "That's what I was worth." "No," he said. "That's what I thought I was proving in the first 10 minutes. After that, Kate, I know how this sounds. I know I don't get to just say things changed and have you believe me." "You're right," she said. "You don't. I bought the land because it was a good acquisition on paper. I didn't know anything about what was on it. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth of how I operate, how I used to operate, where things are numbers until you know them personally, and by the time you know them personally, you're already committed." He paused. "I pulled the acquisition." She was still. "I told my development director on Tuesday. We're not moving forward with Glenridge. We're looking at 2 sites north of Eglinton instead." A long pause. "Why?" she said. "Because I know what's on it now." Kate looked at him for a long time. Not with warmth, not yet, but with the careful attention of someone who is trying very hard to see a thing clearly, without wanting to get it wrong in either direction. "You lied to me," she said. "Not by saying false things, but you let me form a picture that wasn't real. For weeks. Yes, and you almost tore down the place where my daughter spends every morning." "Yes." She stood up. He didn't move. "I need time," she said. "I'm not saying yes to anything. I'm not saying no. I just need you to not push this while I figure out what I think." "Okay," he said. She left. He stayed on the bench for another 20 minutes. The mallards moved away toward the far bank. The sky was the particular flat white of a Toronto. He thought about something she'd said at Leslieville weeks ago. She already is. And he thought about what it meant to be certain of someone the way Kate was certain of Rosalie. He had never been certain of anything the way Kate was certain of the things she loved. He thought maybe that was something worth becoming. It was Rosalie who moved it forward, which nobody had planned and everyone should probably have expected. Rosalie's class was doing a winter project on local wildlife. She had decided to focus on the common loon, still not actually common, and she needed, for reasons that made complete sense to a 7-year-old, to find an adult who knew how to identify bird calls, so that she could interview them for the expert opinion portion of the assignment. Kate mentioned this with visible neutrality in a text to Brendan in early December. She added, "I'm not asking you to be involved. She asked me to ask you. You can say no." Brendan said yes. He showed up at their apartment on a Saturday afternoon with a library book on Canadian birds, borrowed not purchased, because he thought a purchased one might feel like showing off. And he sat at Kate's kitchen table while Rosalie interviewed him with a level of professional seriousness that her homeroom teacher would have recognized. He knew very little about bird calls. He said so plainly. Rosalie seemed once again to find his ignorance usefully instructive. Kate made tea and sat at the far end of the table, ostensibly reading. She did not read very much. She watched the two of them, the 7-year-old with her clipboard and her very specific questions, and the man in the gray Henley who was answering each one as though it was the most important question he had been asked all week, and she felt something in her chest that she had not felt in a very long time. She did not say anything about it. After Rosalie was in bed, Kate and Brendan sat at the kitchen table with tea that had gone slightly cold, and they talked for 3 hours. Not about the bet, not about the community center, about other things, her 2 years at Ryerson, the specific moment she had decided to stop waiting for circumstances to improve and start just doing the work in front of her. About his mother who still lived in Sudbury, who still thought his job was something with buildings. About Rosalie's father, whom Kate spoke of briefly and without drama. He had chosen a different life, that was the whole of it, and Rosalie was not damaged by his absence, but she was occasionally aware of it in ways that a mother notices and nobody else does. She seemed fine today, Brendan said. She is fine, Kate said. She's also 7. She's not going to lay out her feelings for a man she just met. A pause. She liked you, though. Brendan looked at his tea. I'm not asking you for anything, Kate said. I just thought you should know. December moved into January. He came back, not every week, but often enough. He took them to the AGO one Saturday. Kate's idea, originally overheard from somewhere, and Rosalie spent 45 minutes in front of a painting of a northern lake because it reminded her of loon habitat. He and Kate stood slightly behind her, at an angle, not touching, and Brendan looked at the painting and tried to see what Rosalie saw in it. He thought he was beginning to. In late January, he asked Kate if she'd consider having dinner with him. Just the two of them. She said yes this time, without a pause long enough to mean no. They went to a small Italian place near Kensington Market, the kind that is always full and slightly too loud and very good. They split a bottle of wine. He told her about the 2 Eglinton sites and the revised project timeline. She told him that the community center had sent the staff a note about the acquisition being withdrawn, and that Sandra had cried in the supply room and then claimed it was allergies. He laughed, a real laugh. She watched him laugh and thought, there he is, that's the actual person. They stayed until the place started putting chairs on tables around them. He walked her to her car. She turned at the door, one hand on the handle, and looked at him. I want to try, she said, properly, with everything on the table. He said, okay. She said, I mean it about everything. No more versions. No more versions, he said. She nodded. Got in the car, he stood on the sidewalk in the January cold and watched her taillights turn the corner, and he felt something that he had not felt in so many years that he had almost decided it wasn't available to him anymore. He took out his phone and called Will. You owe me something, he said. The food bank donation, Will said immediately. Already sent it. Sent it in October, honestly. I figured you'd... I wasn't talking about the donation, Brendan said. A pause. Then what? Will said. An apology, Brendan said, for saying I'd forgotten how to be a person. Because I don't think I'd forgotten. I think I just hadn't met the right ones yet. Will was quiet for a moment. Then he said, quietly, yeah, maybe. Brendan walked back to his car. The city was quiet in the way that January makes it quiet. The sound of it absorbed into the cold. His breath came in small clouds and disappeared. He thought about a 7-year-old who was concerned about migration patterns. He thought about a woman who loved without performance. He thought about the long way around he had taken to get to a kitchen table in Scarborough, and how, from where he was standing now, none of it felt like a waste. He drove home. He did not put the Rolex back on.